So welcome everyone, I'm Shani Barracks Moore, and welcome to our Social Justice Keynote Address at the 2019 UNT Equity and Diversity Conference. Today we host Dr. Jalane Schmidt, whose address is titled, "America, This Is Not a Drill, Sounding the Alarm Against White Supremacy." We encourage you to tweet your questions for Dr. Schmidt using our hashtag EDC19 at UNT, and you all have been tweeting all day, so thank you for that. It's been great looking at the remarks, which will be posed by Alex Sylvester. Alex is in the back again. Hi, Alex.
Hello, I'm back here. Tweet your questions, and I'll compile them and get them out onto the IRL platform, and I'll save you from fire.
Okay, so we're pleased to welcome back Mayhill Hospital Behavioral Health, who has returned this year as our social justice sponsor. So I'm going to turn it over to Mayhill Hospital Behavioral Health CEO Nicole Attar, who actually happens to be one of my friends too. So welcome, Nicole.
Good afternoon. Today's been awesome, right? Are you pumped? Yeah. So I'm happy to be part of the UNT Equity and Diversity Conference as the social justice sponsor for the second year in a row. This conference is pretty amazing. It's a rare opportunity for like-minded partnerships and a renewed energy for social justice efforts. It's a sense of safety and home in a otherwise sometimes harsh climate. I'm grateful to UNT for the warm blanket. At Mayhill Hospital, we address health through a whole person approach. This includes addressing the physical, mental, and spiritual needs of a person. This work requires conscious awareness of implicit bias and a willingness to commit to the unconditional positive regard of each life we touch. Unconditional positive regard requires intention, the intention to understand each individual and allow for their perspective. Our next speaker, Dr. Jalane Schmidt, is a woman who acts with this intention. Dr. Jalane Schmidt is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Virginia, where she teaches classes on Latin American, Caribbean, and African diaspora religions. For years, she has conducted field research and archival research in Cuba, and she is the author of Cachita Streets, the Virgin of Charity, Race, and Revolution in Cuba. She also teaches classes on critical whiteness studies, religion, and on social movements. She is an organizer with the Charlottesville chapter of Black Lives Matter. She has appeared in numerous national and international news outlets and frequently speaks to audiences about whiteness, white supremacy, policing, and affordable housing. Dr. Schmidt has been active since 2016 in the local struggle to rid Charlottesville of its Confederate monuments. And during 2017 Summer of Hate, she helped organize counter demonstrations against white supremacist rallies in Charlottesville. Please welcome Dr. Jalane Schmidt.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to the University of Texas, and particularly to Shani Barracks Moore and the Equity and Diversity Conference here. I'm honored to be invited to speak, and as I explained to some of the folks at my table, that it's gratifying to sometimes get away from home, where all this stuff happened, all this drama happened, and get to a place and talk to other people about it and trying to promote understanding. So thanks for hosting me here. So I'm going to talk at first. I'm going to really breeze through really quickly kind of the local history and events that happened in Charlottesville as a way of kind of talking about some of the most overt, violent white supremacist gathering that we've had in decades in this country, and then segue into kind of talking about the everyday white supremacy that we all need to face, that is brought about. So I wanted to say that, Charlottesville, Virginia, it's a very kind of genteel kind of place. We're surrounded by vineyards, and, destination weddings are one of our big industries, and a fairly affluent place by and large, although we do have a 25% poverty rate, and many of our African American families live in poverty. So there's kind of dual narratives going on. On the one hand, we're the land of the founding fathers, Presidents Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, all hail from the area. And we have a very kind of high sense of self-regard. You know, it's a just physically, geographically beautiful place. You know, lots of resources. Of course, the University of Virginia, so-called public ivy, is there. And, you know, so there's a lot of, you know, kind of high self-regard that was really punctured by the Summer of Hate, you know, by all the hateful images that were out there that also forced, you know, many people in our town to face up to the continuing legacy of white supremacy, you know, that does go on every day. So, you know, I just wanted to, you know, to point out here, you know, here's a you know, very common kind of ad that happened during the antebellum era, and one of our most illustrious residents, Thomas Jefferson, who owned some 600 human beings during the course of his life, was of course a resident there. If you look here at this map, Charlottesville, you see the dark areas of the map there? Those are the counties where more than half the population was enslaved, okay, at the time of the Civil War. So if you see the one, you know, we're kind of in the middle there, that's a dark county that has a dot in the middle of it, that little dot there is Charlottesville. So over half the population of Charlottesville and Albemarle County were enslaved at the time of the Civil War. I can't overemphasize that, you know, because that's so important, or should be, to our narrative, which kind of gets us into a discussion of history versus memory, and how memory can encode ethics or not, morality or violence, right, and this sort of thing, and also impede our capacity for empathy. You know, and that's what we were looking for in our town as we were trying to change our narrative, because even though over half the town was enslaved, this is the only public marker. That's my shoe there, by the way, for scale, just so you can see that. It's a 1 foot by 1 foot marker that's flush with the ground. That is the only public marker we have in our public spaces that tells the fact, the historical fact, that over half the population was enslaved. You know, meanwhile, what we do have are these large public monuments, and here is the installation of the Stonewall Jackson statue in 1921. You can see over here that this is the courthouse here, and this is a Confederate flag, of course, and this is a 25-foot tall statue. And this park here used to be an African American and mixed race neighborhood that was raised by eminent domain by the city in order to put in a whites-only park, which then became anchored by this statue. So wrap your mind around that. There is a direct relationship in Charlottesville and other places too between the dispossession of white property, of black people's property, and the imposition of memory, in this case, kind of lost cause narrative of the Civil War in that space. So that's what we got. So, here, if we just kind of look at, this is what things look at. So there's my foot again. You see this down here in that little marker that I showed you before, yeah? And that's all there is for over half the population. That's it. And over here, you'd think they won the war. And that's what you're supposed to think. All right, that's the thing. So then, as we know, in June of 2015, there was the horrible massacre in Charleston, in which white supremacists came into a black church and killed 9 members of the congregation. Shortly after that, a high school student from Charlottesville High School by the name of Ziona Bryant, here she is, started a petition to remove our Confederate statues. Behind her is Councilman Wes Bellamy, at that time the only black council member we had, so it went to City Council to consider what we might do, and the City Council set up a commission and had a series of hearings. This was in 2016. I can't overemphasize how the national narrative that was going on at that time, which was the Trump 2016 presidential campaign, which was whipping up all sorts of racist vitriol, was going on at the same time as our local discussion in Charlottesville over that period of months from March through November. This was going on at the same time, and indeed, in some of the rallies, where Trump was kind of goading people to be violent and saying, "I'll even pay your legal fees," and this sort of, some of those same people who were arrested for assaulting someone at the rally, some of them showed up on our streets a few months later. There is a direct relationship. This cannot be divorced, okay? The national narrative that was going on and then our discussion there, you know. So this, you know, at the end of this 9-month process of hearings, this is the last meeting that we had of the commission. It was 2 days after the election. And Charlottesville progressives, and Charlottesville is a, you know, fairly Democratic-leaning city. About 80% of the vote, you know, went for Clinton. Yeah, and this was the last meeting, and so proponents of removing the statue, you know, were quite upset and wore T-shirts that said, "We stand with the 52%," which meant the enslaved population at the time of the Civil War, meaning that we would rather have our memory that is kind of presented in our public spaces for public edification reflect the fact that we stand with those who were disenfranchised at the time of the Civil War, which was, again, demographically correct. I mean, this is actually, you know, the historical narrative of our town. So this you know, effort to remove the statue, plus this was a week after Trump's inauguration in January 2017, when the travel ban came out, which was banning refugees that were coming from majority Muslim countries. Well, Charlottesville has a relatively high proportion of our population are immigrants and refugees. Although we're only a town of about 50,000 and we're fairly compact, only 10 square miles, about 3.5% of the population are refugees and immigrants, you know, because we've been designated as a refugee resettlement community by the State Department, because we have good schools, good bus systems, good economy, you know, all these sorts of things, you know. And so that's really a big part of our identity in Charlottesville, is that we are a welcoming community too. And indeed, if you remember the 2016 Democratic National Convention, when Khazar and Ghazala Khan made that you know, famous speech, and he whipped the Constitution out of his pocket. Well, the Khans are from Charlottesville, you know, and that was such a, I'll just tell you, that was such a Charlottesville moment to have your Constitution in your breast pocket, which I always do, because Madison's from right there, you know, and Jefferson and Monroe too, you know. So this notion of, you know, kind of constitutional history is very strong, and we carry that mantle with pride, you know, some pride, you know. And so this, you know, the mayor here pronounced our town, in the face of these restrictions on immigrants and refugees, the mayor pronounced Charlottesville to be the capital of the resistance. And that, combined with the effort to get rid of Confederate monuments, put a target on Charlottesville's back, all right? White supremacists started, some of them were local, and started kind of calling in their buddies, started coming to town with more and more frequency. The final vote was taken in city council to remove the statues, you know, and then political candidates picked up on the issue and made it a campaign issue. Particularly, this is Corey Stewart in this case, and this campaign, these campaigns, here we have, you know, both our congressional representative and this gubernatorial candidate who won the Republican nomination, had very close relationships with local white supremacist and alt-right organizers. You know, this was in the spring of and on into the summer of 2017. So we didn't feel the support of our political leaders, you know, at the state level, and even our local congressional district. There was this tension, you know, between what the townspeople wanted and what our representatives were out promoting, which is that they were making a campaign issue out of Charlottesville's effort to change our narrative. Yeah. So, and you know, what happened then in May of 2017 was that, you know, again, as I mentioned, we have a lot of immigrants and refugees who live in our community. There's an annual festival of cultures where they all set up their booths and sell their food and perform their dances, et cetera, et cetera. And the alt-right showed up right here and were intimidating the refugees and immigrants, and then going to the Germany booth and just kind of extolling, yes, that happened, you know, their affinity, you know, for certain parts of German history. I kid you not. Then that same night was the first torch rally, which captured national and international attention. This was May the 13th, 2017. This horrified the community, terrorized us, particularly older black residents of the community. About 20% of the town is black. This was just, just the worst thing. It just struck fear in everyone's hearts, and there was really a desire to reclaim that space, which had been, kind of taken over there. So we have this practice in Charlottesville that we call holding space, and that is that we don't allow Nazis to come to our streets and public parks without some vocal, visible presence of dissent. That is, we will not allow these hateful elements to have flattering pictures of themselves, which they turn into propaganda videos. That's what they do. Flattering pictures of themselves with some sort of iconic object in the background. This is what they like to do. They go to Mount Vernon in Northern Virginia, Washington's estate, unfurl their banners in front of the mansion, mug for the camera, and then they send this out. I mean, they want to kind of normalize themselves. And so being able to be in these public spaces unimpeded is something that is good for them and makes for good propaganda. We say we don't want this to be normalized. We don't think it should be normal and acceptable for Nazis to appear unopposed, in our public spaces. And I should have said remember that vintage picture from 1921 where the Stonewall Jackson statue was being installed there beside the courthouse where there was a black neighborhood. I should say that inside the courthouse is literally, you can't make this stuff up, folks. The Klan used to have their organizing meetings in the courthouse, which is kind of appropriate when you think about, the unjust sentences that are handed down to African Americans inside many courthouses. But that was a thing, there in the 20s. And according to newspaper accounts of the time, which were very laudatory, some of the town's leading business and professional men were members. Hundreds of people. They had their first inaugural cross burning at Monticello, at Jefferson's home. You can't, it's like you can't make this stuff up, So in contrast to the 1920s when Klansmen passed through society, polite society, without reproach, we said no, because we say never again, you will not be able to be a member of such a hateful group and promote your ideology and be violent. Because every time these guys came to town in that spring and summer, they would drive through black neighborhoods, be shouting all manner of racial epithets, threatening people. That young activist, the young black teenager who started the petition, got death threats. Our black city council member, he got death threats. Another city council member who was, in favor of this before, also got death threats. Her family got death threats. So very dangerous. And yet we found it difficult to convince a lot of townspeople just how dangerous these people were because they looked so normal. You saw the picture back here, and they're just wearing, khaki pants and polo shirts. What's the big deal? But we tried to educate, people in the community that actually these folks, they are the 21st century version of the Klan. And, and at that time, how many of y'all in spring of 2017 had heard the name Richard Spencer? A few? Couple? How many of you heard of him now? Right, that's what I'm saying. And so most people weren't aware, and so they didn't see the danger, that the activists did. But we were insistent on holding space, and so whenever groups would show up, we would also show up and just be a witness, to the fact that this was not an opinion that we supported. And we didn't want them just, being, kind of univocally taking space, in our public spaces. And so we showed up, In some cases, folks would come to town. They were having planning meetings. And that was what was most objectionable, was that they were not simply coming to town to, kind of see the sights or this sort of thing. They were actually having planning meetings in some of the restaurants and bars downtown. And so activists would sometimes, go there and kind of alert people and also just, try to make things uncomfortable. And that's, kind of a message I would kind of impart here that's very portable. Get comfortable making racists uncomfortable, Don't let this metastasize, This should not be normal, Here you can see this is an actual receipt that was left. There were many like this. They were also harassing and throwing racial epithets and homophobic slurs and pushing and assaulting restaurant staff as well. I mean, these were very, violent people. And so there were a lot of confrontations there on the downtown mall. And I have to say, where these restaurants were, the proprietors of these restaurants were not happy with us activists, I gotta say. They said we're bad for business. And we said, well, if you don't serve these people, then we won't be here protesting, and then your business will be better, we tried to, kind of go around like that. Other customers as well weren't happy with this state of affairs, and we would say to them, let's do a thought experiment here. If you're sitting at dinner at a restaurant, and 4 guys come to the next table in full Klan regalia and just sit down to eat, what would you do? No, that's not a rhetorical question. What would you do? What's that? Why would you leave, though? Why wouldn't you want them to leave? I mean, Yeah. And so we kept trying to say, these folks are the 21st century Klan. But again, it was hard to get people to wrap their mind around this, that these folks were dangerous. They're wearing khaki pants. They've got smart haircuts. They're wearing polo shirts. They look neat. What's going on? So we kind of changed our tactics a little bit. We realized that, that is the activists. And instead of just showing up just when the Nazis did, the alert would go out. It's like, oh, they're here, show up, and yelling would ensue, sometimes scuffles. There were some arrests. We went rather during the day, weekday morning, to the restaurants and just sat down calmly, with the managers, with the owners, and said, we live in this community too. We know you live here. We all got to live here. We all want to be safe. These people are making people unsafe. They're the ones that planned that first torch rally back in May. They're here to plan another one. I swear to you, they are not just having beers. This is a meetup. We've seen it online. This is what they're doing. They're planning the next one. And so if we want to have a safe community for everybody, how about y'all think about not serving them? Because it's not a protected category to be a hater. It's actually not, it's not illegal to not serve someone, if they're, shouting homophobic slurs and, all manner of stuff like they were doing. And so, we talked with them, kind of reasoned with them, wrote up even a little legal memo and stuff, that kind of answered all these questions. And then the tide kind of started to turn then, and we all saw ourselves as allies in this struggle, rather than, kind of noisy activists over here, alt-right over there, restaurateurs just trying to make a living over here, you know what I mean? Rather, there was, kind of a community effort. The restaurateurs got together, organized themselves, the managers, and they decided they weren't going to serve these people anymore, and that was a victory, that they said, we don't have to serve people that are coming in and threatening our community. We don't need to do that. And it started, this rejection was helpful, but we still had some unwelcome visitors. The Klan came to town. Ironically, the Klan came, this was July the 8th, 2017. They came and they were on the same space there around the Jackson statue where their forebears, 100 years before, used to have meetings inside the courthouse. So it was kind of a homecoming, you might say, that was going on there. There was a lot of social pressure not to protest. I already explained the situation on the downtown mall, pedestrian mall area, with the tension between proprietors, customers, activists, and the alt-right, But there was also just a lot of social pressure to not show up. There were some brave folks, but it was a small minority, actually, that showed up to protest these folks. But the message was very clear. It was from the police, from the politicians, from the preachers, and even from the president of the university where I work. Don't protest. Don't go there. You're just feeding the fire. You're adding oxygen to the fire. You're just making it worse. You're bringing more attention to it. But we said, no. It's like we can't allow Nazis and Klansmen to show up in our public spaces and not have any sign of dissent. It's like that's not allowed, because never again, we're not giving these folks a pass. So here are some pastors that they, kind of defied some social norms there, because this is a very small, I can count on 2 hands the number of pastors out of all churches in town, out of the folks that showed up. It's a very small number, and that's very instructive to remember, because in every social movement, the majority of folks just stay home and watch TV and stuff and don't get involved or don't want to get involved, you know. Only a small minority of folks, the public at large, like actually approves of the movement, and then a tiny sliver of those folks actually do anything about it. You know what I mean? It's always a small number, you know what I mean? Everybody likes to imagine that, you know, oh, if it were during the slavery regime, you know, I would have been a conductor on the Underground Railroad, right? Or if it were World War II, I would have joined the French resistance or hid Jewish fugitives in my attic, right? Whoa, during the Civil Rights Movement, I would have marched with MLK across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, right? No, you wouldn't have. No, you wouldn't have. Whatever you're doing right now or not doing is what you would have been doing then. So think on that, because now's the moment, you know? So this minority of folk, and we didn't have a lot of support from our fellow Charlottesvillians. I just got to say, it's so gratifying getting invitations like this. I can just talk like this, and, you know, because it's still a little, there's still some social tensions, you know, there in the town from this, you know, because there are some folks that realize belatedly that, oh, that Unite the Right, that was the Edmund Pettus Bridge of 2017, and I didn't march across, and I tried to discourage other, belatedly. Yeah? But there was a lot of pressure not to go. Now, some people, about 20 or so, decided to take things even further and engage in civil disobedience. You know, it is the First Amendment protected right of any group, no matter how odious, you know, to protest in a public space, and this was a public park. They'd applied for a permit. They were there. But these citizens said, again, kind of holding space and never again, just kind of locked arms and, you know, physically blocking the path of the Klan as a way of, you know, kind of bearing witness, you know, and saying, you know, with their very bodies and saying no. And of course, they were summarily arrested and taken off. And things kind of went downhill after the rally, which is always when things, you know, go south. That is when people were leaving and getting contradictory directions from the police, either, you know, get off the sidewalk or now get on the street. And in any case, they shot tear gas at our backs, and we had, you know, 4 civil liberties organizations that filed complaints with the police, from the ACLU to the Legal Aid Justice Center and the Rutherford Institute and the National Lawyers Guild, all 4 of them. And we had legal observers that were there that pointed out that actually you pointed the tear gas at their backs as they were you know, leaving. But anyway, so this engendered a lot of tension. So this is July the 8th. This isn't even Unite the Right yet. All right, this is just the Klan rally, you know. And so then, seeing the danger that was coming, many of us, you know, went to City Council, tried to get City Council to revoke the permit for the Unite the Right that was coming in August, you know, because we knew that was, I mean, the Klan rally was only 4 dozen Klansmen, but we knew that it would be many, many hundreds of folks coming in August. We were very concerned about that. Also, in the case of the Unite the Right rally, the alt-right organizers were issuing open threats online. I mean, this wasn't even a secret. Even the car attack was planned, folks. I'm serious. You know, that they were talking about this, you know, how to roll over counter-protesters. So we were, you know, kind of appealing to our city officials to please revoke the permit, because this, when someone is inciting violence, you know, as part of their intention for what is supposed to be a First Amendment protected right of free speech, then that's no longer what's going on anymore if you're inciting violence. But we were unsuccessful. Here's a, you know, propaganda poster, and, you know, a note here, just the the combination of 4 authoritarian groups of symbols. I mean, we have, of course, the Confederacy, here's Confederate monuments, Confederate flag, Pepe the Frog, march, an alt-right symbol character that was appropriated by the alt-right anyway, marching in formation in Confederate Union, in Confederate uniforms. This is the Nazi eagle carrying Italian fasces, you know, the symbol of Mussolini and the fascists, you know. So this very dense constellation of symbols was being mobilized by the alt-right as part of the goals for their rally, which was the goal of it was to unite these various factions, you know, that couldn't get along. You had neo-Confederates and Nazis and, kind of button-down alt-right types and, all types, trying to get them together. As I said, with the education campaign, with the downtown merchants, they banded together to refuse service to these folks in order to remove a kind of gathering places for them to plan, and in order that they would not stay in town either. I mean, if you can't spend your money anywhere, it's kind of hard to, to come to town. Airbnb canceled a lot of their reservations as well. But in any case, what happened was Charlottesville became an occupied city. There were 6 different law enforcement agencies there, including the National Guard, that were coming to town. It was a very regimented affair. I just remember the helicopters just constantly overhead, circling. Propaganda was put under my windshield wiper of my car, i.e., we know where you live, this sort of thing, and the cars of other people's as well. People were getting threats. So we decided to fortify ourselves, spiritually. We had a mass prayer service going on. At a downtown church or near the university, and there were some 500 people showed up for this church service in order to pray, to sing together, to fortify ourselves spiritually. This was the night before the Unite the Right rally, so this was Friday night on the 11th of August 2017. We got together there. While we were there worshiping for several hours, there were 2 threats that were called into the church, gun threats, and then one of them had infiltrated and was live casting from inside to his buddies outside as well. And then we got word that there were hundreds of them coming with torches, that they were coming toward the church. They were actually across the street from the church at the university, streaming through the campus. Hundreds of them, in order to surround the statue of Thomas Jefferson. So they saw this as a sort of homecoming to a white founding hero. And this was part of their, and also 2 of the main organizers of the Unite the Right rally are graduates of the University of Virginia. So this notion that these folks are uneducated, they're not intelligent, or no. These folks, and historically speaking, most white supremacists have worn coats and ties. I mean, think about it, mortgage boards, school boards, right? All this sort of thing. So they came there and they surrounded my students, one of whom was in a wheelchair, and they were assaulted, with the tiki torches. They were covered in lighter fluid. They were trying to light them on fire. I mean, it could have been even worse than it was. And this, this was just the night before. And so we were really afraid then, knowing that things were going to be quite violent, the next day. So we met again in a church, this time in a downtown black church. It had been founded by freedmen after the Civil War. It was the site of many NAACP meetings back during the segregation era, the sort of thing. We met there in order to steel ourselves because we knew, because of what had happened the night before at the university campus with the assaults on the students at the torch rally, we knew that there was likely to be deaths. And it was just the scariest thing ever. But again, we had this insistence upon holding space. We weren't going to be turned around, as the old song says. I'm not going to let nobody turn me around. Not going to happen, So we met there, and I just remember, the co-founder, I'm co-founder of the local chapter of Black Lives Matter, and my co-founder, he's here, that's him there. Just remember, it was only about 7:38 in the morning, and we hugged each other goodbye. His shirt was already soaked with sweat. Wasn't but 8, not even 8 in the morning yet. And we were crying. A lot of us were crying because we knew that somewhere, some way, that day, someone was going to get killed. We didn't know how, but we just felt it, in our being after what had taken place the night before and how this had been building up over the past 6-8 months, But pressed on, and again, you see here, this is Cornell West here. There were a bunch of national clergy that came in because some of my colleagues who are here, right here, some local folks, some of the few clergy that locally, put out a national call. The United Methodist Bishop of the Commonwealth of Virginia basically forwarded this call to all the clergy, all the United Methodist clergy within Virginia, and basically said, report for duty, there. So we did have support, folks coming in from outside the community to kind of bolster our numbers because, as I said, there was a lot of social pressure not to protest. There in Charlottesville, it's just too genteel. It's just so impolite or not civil or something. It's seen that way, which is true of every social movement. There's always discouragement against protest. If you ever read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, has anyone heard of that? I'm a professor, so I'm going to give an assignment. If you haven't read that, it's on, consult the Googles and read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And it's about this kind of small c conservatism, I call it. He talks about, especially white moderates being the biggest impediment to black liberation because the messages always go slow, not so fast, don't be so loud, you're being divisive, as if you're supposed to let this keep going on and on and on, So folks, some folks, we really appreciated our, our national allies who showed up with us, accomplices, I like to call them. But we had, phalanxes of militiamen, very heavily armed. They were more heavily armed than the National Guard. And then, of course, the columns and columns of alt-right forces of various extractions, whether Southern nationalists, secessionists, neo-Nazis, alt-right, and assorted others, So you can see that, someone's bought a banner to string across the street there. So this is, kind of one of the ironies of the images of that day. But it was, just very, just a very, a very tough time, very tough day, very threatening. We had, kind of nothing but our bodies, and of course, we all saw what happened on the news. I'm not going to replay that. So you see here, here's some local black men who are being, in this case, you see this little white man here? See that? See him right there? This guy is actually defending him. They've been thrown. These neo-Confederates had been. This is a Klansman here, actually, had been throwing. They threw this can of spray paint at him. And the guy very quickly just kind of improvised a blowtorch with it to dispel the Klansmen in this case, and protecting this little guy here. And then, of course, the case of DeAndre Harris, who was beaten just so horribly in the parking garage, which was right beside the police station. The police did nothing. The police stood back and allowed this to happen. We found out later with the investigation that followed, when the city wanted to get to the bottom of this, that the police chief had basically told his officers not to intervene. And kind of let him fight it out, and then he could call an unlawful assembly to end it. So people were just getting beaten, just willy-nilly. And then, of course, the car attack, which took the life of our comrade Heather Heyer. And here you can see some memorials to her. So the fallout from this was, quite intense here. Our city council meetings are epic. There in Charlottesville. Somebody asked me this morning about, kind of getting involved in local politics, and I said, you really got to keep an eye on folks. You've got to show up for meetings. Sometimes they go on and on, but that's where the sausage is being made, and you need to keep an eye on stuff to keep folks honest and transparent and stuff. So there was a lot of anger with city officials after this was over for not revoking the permit. There was anger at the police for allowing these beatings to go on. They literally stood just feet away and did nothing. Just you saw it all on TV, right? I mean, it just stood there, and so there was a lot of anger then afterwards, and it hasn't. I wish I could say it's ended, but it hasn't. They came back, just a couple months later. Again, had yet another torch rally, or Charlottesville 3.0, they called it, They were back just last month, also, the Klan, throwing their propaganda out there. But we struggle on, and so part of what we've done is to go from looking at, I kind of talk about white supremacy as having kind of different moments. I mean, there's the real visible white supremacy, you know, kind of these symbols, these monuments of marble and bronze that are in the parks, Nazis marching in the street, very visible, you know, that's the kind of condensation moment, I call it, you know. But the dissipation moment, it's like an airborne toxin. It's like it's actually affecting everyone, but black folks are often the canary in the coal mine, you know, that it affects people of color first. You know, it's kind of, you know, targeting us, but ultimately it's lethal for everyone, actually, white supremacy is. It truncates everybody's sense of humanity, you know, even white folks. White supremacy is bad for everybody, you know. And so one of our takeaways has been, you know, not only challenging the kind of condensation moments of white supremacy, but also the dissipation moments of white supremacy. So that has taken the form of holding the police accountable. We have disproportionate levels of stop and frisk rates in our town. 20% of the population is black, and it's about, you know, 70% of the stop and frisks are targeted at young black men. You know, I showed you this here. Would you believe that the only ones to be charged were 3 black men? Yeah, that happened. Seriously. Yeah. And meanwhile, these guys that were beating DeAndre Harris, we had to crowdsource this stuff on Twitter with help from Sean King in order to ID these guys, or they wouldn't have even been prosecuted. The FBI set up a little field office there, and they admitted all they did was follow Sean King's Twitter feed. You know. Meanwhile, these guys were getting prosecuted because the Nazis filed charges against them that were completely bogus and got dropped, but they had to spend all kind of time defending themselves. So we would show up at their court dates. Here we are outside the courthouse, outside the police station, constantly there, once, sometimes twice a week, you know, going to support our comrades that had been charged, and then showing up to support affordable housing as well. Again, the dissipation moment, you know, how this white supremacy gets encoded into the institutional structures, you know, such that, you know, as I already mentioned, you know, that monument that got put in, it was formerly a black neighborhood. The land was literally taken away from these black folks in order to put in a whites-only park with that statue on it. And that wasn't the first time. I mean, you know, or that wasn't the last time either. During so-called urban renewal in the 60s, this happened again, you know. So housing, you know, as it says here, housing is a human right, not a luxury commodity. We've got problems with gentrification, you know, so we're doing all this. So we're doing that locally, you know, it's part of our struggle locally. And then also, this campaign has kind of picked up nationally. I mean, up here is, you know, Spencer went on just a little bit after Charlottesville and went on to the University of Florida. They drowned him out. Then he tried to go to Michigan State. They stood up against him. Tried to go to places in Tennessee. Counter-protesters stood up to them. Finally, he just admitted that, you know, we can't have these rallies anymore. And we said, good, that's a victory, you know. So we'd gone from people telling us not to protest, right, that this is indecorous, impolite, you know, et cetera, we don't want to hear it, you're fanning the flames, to there being so much protest in so many places, because other people were taking a page from our playbook, in Gainesville, Florida, in Michigan State, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Finally, they stopped showing up. Plus, they went broke from all the lawsuits, you know. Plus, they got deplatformed on Twitter, on Facebook, and on PayPal, so they couldn't get their money anymore, you know. So this was, you know, kind of part of the struggle is, like I said, get comfortable making racists uncomfortable, you know. Particularly, I would say to white folks out there, you know, be not just an ally. I don't want just a pat on the back. I want an accomplice. I want someone that's got skin in the game. I want someone that's, you say, well, if I've got to go to jail, I've got to go to jail, or if I'm going to, you know, or other things. There's so many things you can do. And I say this, not everybody belongs at the barricades, all right? Everybody's got to evaluate their own physical and mental health and emotional vulnerabilities and all that thing. Not everybody belongs in the streets, okay? But support the people who are there. There's lots of background roles. We had little old ladies in churches baking casseroles, you know, for the activist meetings, or folks that were, you know, funding nonviolent direct action teams, training sessions. We had teenagers like my daughter who was a volunteer babysitter, you know, for the activist kids while they were there. You know, there's all sorts of ways to contribute. We had lawyers that promoted pro bono services, therapists that did kind of post-traumatic stress disorder counseling after the fact. You know, lots of ways to be supportive in this effort, but it really takes a community working together to confront this and to not, allow this to be normalized. We were really hurt after August the 12th, after these attacks, when the president kind of, said that, there were very fine people on both sides. We do not see it that way at all. As I've said before, there's no both sides when one side is genocide. There's no meeting in the middle. There's no compromise to be made. Whenever there's a compromise, there was a 3/5 compromise, the Missouri compromise, was it the Atlanta compromise? Anytime there's a compromise, it seems like black folks are losing out. It's our humanity that's at stake, And so we're trying to, fight this thing. But we need, folks to be in this together and to keep the emphasis on making it uncomfortable, right? To hold it, to kind of promote this kind of hate, in public. So with that, I'll just kind of stop there and kind of, open this up so that we can have some discussion. But also, what I would say is to don't, that people of color have been carrying this burden for a long time. Our lives are at stake, have been threatened for a long time. We need accomplices, right? Everyone should have skin in the game, right? In order to make sure that this sort of bigotry and hate is not normalized, because we're better than that. We can be empathetic, all right? We can expand the narrative and include people in these lives. All right, thank you.
Alex, do we have any tweeted questions for Dr. Schmidt?
We do.
Oh, great.
I'm probably going to botch this Twitter handle, but Footcom might be, wants to know, is the rise of hate groups and violent protests likely to fade away if a Democratic president gets elected or get worse?
I don't know. I can't predict that. I mean, this white supremacy has actually been a constant thread through U.S. history, and it's not partial to any party or the other. I mean, it was, at the time of the Civil War, I mean, white Southerners were Democrats. The ranks of the Klan were full of Democrats. There was an ideological shift, with the Southern strategy after the 1960s. But white supremacy can move fairly easily in any direction. I don't know, I feel it might seem like some hubris for me to come from the Commonwealth of Virginia, of all places. You've seen what's been happening during our Black History Month this year, But, we see, there's Democratic Party politicians, who were participating in in these sorts of, degradations of black humanity, with blackface and that sort of thing too. So this is no respecter of parties, there is, kind of, so I don't know that the amount of organizing. I mean, the organizations, these kind of alt-right organizations, have definitely splintered since the white supremacist attacks in Charlottesville, owing to the deplatforming campaign of activists and also in tandem with businesses who finally got the memo, that actually it is legal. You don't have to serve any people. You're not obligated, as long as you're not discriminating against someone based upon the perception that they belong to a statutorily protected category, okay? It is not against the law. It isn't, And so these folks, been like basically ripping the rug out from it. You can't use PayPal to go to your little hater conferences, You can't be tweeting out hate, this sort of thing. So with the deplatforming, our city filed a lawsuit against some of these groups as well, And so with that has really splintered. Then there's been lots of finger pointing and, accusations back and forth because, quite frankly, Charlottesville was a PR disaster, So they have splintered. Unfortunately, the policies they support are still on the march, So that's a problem. We got to still, kind of keep our eye on that ball. But in terms of, what's going on, and is there's a demographic change that's going on in our country, whereby if present trends continue and if present categories continue, which there's no guarantee that they will, just speaking now as an anthropologist, right? Whiteness has this way of morphing, this sort of thing. But if present trends continue, they say by 2040, whites may be in the minority here in this country. That is a cause of a lot of anxiety for these groups. That was kind of the calling card for these alt-right groups, that you will not replace us. That's their favorite mantra. So this fear of being overwhelmed by a brown horde, is really was highly motivating to them, and this is still kind of animating some of their organizing, I've got to say. So no guarantees, don't know where this is going. That's why it's important to stay vigilant. It's going to happen under any government,
Dr. Schmidt, hi, thanks for coming and speaking. I have a question. Do you support the struggle of undocumented students to get ICE and Customs and Border Patrol off of campus? Currently, the university has invited them to come to career fairs to recruit students to join, and when they come in full regalia, like dressed up and down. At a university that claims to support diversity and inclusion, I'm wondering if you see the irony in that and how you feel about that.
Yeah, I do. I do see this as very problematic, and it raises the issue of, what can a public institution do, when another public institution, in this case ICE, right, wants to come and recruit like that. This is a legal problem too, and legal liability, and I'm sure that's why the university is embroiled in this, I'm going to guess here, Yeah, I think it is inappropriate. Now, legally, I don't know what recourse the university has, and I'm guessing, with apologies to my host, that general counsel is, kind of, advising them not to stop ICE, and this sort of thing. But as I mentioned, this is the same problem that we had in Charlottesville. It's like, the city officials are like, well, we have to grant them a permit because free speech, and it's a public place, and, and the university too. The university let those guys come on campus because they said, it's a public place and we can come there, So public entities have, one set of standards that they have to follow. For instance, you can go to city council and you can spew all manner of horrible things in city council. The newspaper does not have to print your op-ed, though, a privately owned entity. You see what I'm saying? You know what I mean? So anyway, so the university can do one thing, but then it falls on citizens, activists, to do what we can do. And that might mean making folks uncomfortable, disrupting. Things like, you saw those guys that were like banded together to stop the Klan from entering the park. Might say it's a rough effort, but find ways to disrupt, find ways to make it untenable.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Schmidt, for your talk and your keynote. Please join me in giving her another round of applause.